I do want to talk just briefly about Japanese beetles as well, because usually right around 4th of July is when Japanese beetles start coming out. We start to get a lot of questions about how to care for them, how to treat them, etc. And since we're talking about hibiscus, I figure it might be good because Japanese beetles, unfortunately, do sometimes go after hibiscus, although they rarely cause any serious issues. So, but I did want to talk about Japanese beetle control. So let's talk about Japanese beetles first. I just brought up a few different products here, but let's talk about Japanese beetles in general. So Japanese beetles are the adult form is the beetle that you see flying around at this time of year. So they're small in terms of beetles anyway. They're probably about the size of the nail on your pinky finger, roughly. They are metallic in color, kind of a copper and green color on their back, so they kind of have sort of a shiny metallic appearance. And oftentimes you will find them like on hibiscus. A lot of times you will find them feeding on the leaves or on the flower petals themselves, or munching holes in those. Sometimes you'll see them on the leaves, munching on the leaves. Depending upon the plant, things like linden trees, they're feeding on the leaves of the small leaf linden, like green spire linden. They love roses. They go after all sorts of stuff. And some years they're kind of tough, and some years they're not so bad. My guess, we'll see, but my guess is that this year won't be quite as bad because last year was a drought year. Specifically in the later part of the summer, we had a lot of dry ground conditions. And the reason I say they may not be as bad is that the Japanese beetle, at the end of its feeding season, so like I said, they're just emerging right now, usually around 4th of July, they start feeding for about a month or two, and then they will start laying eggs. And the way that they lay eggs is that the female lands on the ground, typically in the grass more than anything else, and basically lays some eggs in the soil, kind of makes a little slit in the soil, and lays eggs in the soil. Those eggs will hatch and turn into the larva, which is the white grub. So if you've ever had grub problems in your lawn, that's the larval state of the Japanese beetle. So we call them annual white grubs or white grubs. So they're kind of a white or grayish, worm-ish looking thing, about an inch or so, maybe sometimes a tad bit longer, with kind of a brownish or orangish colored head. So if you're ever digging in the soil and you see those things, they kind of curl up when you pull them out of the ground. Those are white grubs. And the white grub feeds on the lawn's roots and can cause a lot of damage in the lawn because obviously if you don't have a root system, you can't support the top green growth. So oftentimes you see brown patches in the lawn. And if you go pull those brown patches, one of the easiest ways to tell if the brown is because of drought or because of fungal disease or something like that is to grab a patch of that brown grass and try to sort of pull up on it. If it sort of holds steady and it's just brown, it may be because of drought or fungal or some other issue. If you grab onto that and it just basically pulls right up, that most likely is related to grubs because the grubs have chewed the roots off and so it just comes right out of the ground. So if you have grubs, treat your lawn for grubs. If you have Japanese beetles, treat for Japanese beetles. I always like to let people know that treating your lawn for white grubs is not going to necessarily change the outcome in terms of the adult Japanese beetle population because they can fly 1.5 miles, 2 miles. So, they could be emerging from your neighbor's lawn or, the next neighborhood over or who knows where. And then they fly into your yard. So treating your lawn for white grubs is not going to control Japanese beetles in your yard necessarily. Another thing I wanted to say is that Japanese beetle traps, so they sell them at a lot of the hardware stores. There's even a handful of garden centers that sell them because they're an easy sell. You will not find them on the shelf here at Wasco Nursery because they don't work. They do work in the sense that if you put one up, you're going to get a ton of Japanese beetles in that trap. So what the trap is it's usually a little kind of plastic crisscrossy top with a bag hanging below it. And the Japanese beetles are attracted to a pheromone that they put on the trap, and they get into the bag and then they can't get out. So when you put those up, you're going to see that they fill up very quickly, and you're like, oh, this is really working. But in all reality, what all of the studies have shown is that when you put that pheromone trap out in your yard, you're attracting more Japanese beetles to your yard than you would have had if you just didn't put the trap up. So even though you've got, let's say, 1,000 beetles in your yard, if you didn't put the trap up, you know, let's say your yard, based on size and location, maybe you're destined, if you will, to get 500 Japanese beetles visiting your yard in, you know, in a given month. And if you bring that trap in, you may get 2,000. 1,000 of them may go into the trap, but 1,000 of them are now in your yard. So you've actually made the problem worse in your own yard. Now, if you could put a trap, say, you know, a few yards down, or, you know, at the end of the neighborhood or something, it probably would work to lure them away. But obviously that's not a great idea. So thus, we don't sell them. We don't recommend them. We are not in the business of selling snake oil. So we want to give you good, logical, effective solutions to control the insects that are necessary to control. So if you do need to control for Japanese beetles, I brought up a few products here. Actually, probably left out a couple that you could use. There's a lot of options. We do have a good page on our website that talks about Japanese beetles, so you can go on there. I brought up a couple that are listed for Japanese beetles. I'm not going to go into super in-depth on them, but 8 is listed for Japanese beetles. This is safe to use on fruits and vegetables. Bug Blaster is listed for Japanese beetles. This is not systemic, but also not listed for use on fruits and vegetables for the most part. So this is good for spraying on trees, linden trees, you know, larger things like that. This is a really effective solution. It works great on roses, all that kind of stuff. It is not a neonicotinoid, so if you're looking for something that is neonic free, this is a good option. Japanese beetle killer, as the name suggests, is listed for Japanese beetles. Easy to use, you just spray it. It's pyrethrin, which is basically derived from the chrysanthemum flower. Very easy and safe to use. It kills on contact, and it is safe for fruits and vegetables. So if you're having problems with them on squash or, you know, some of those kind of things, that's a really effective solution. And then another one that I like, which I don't even think we may be listed on our website, we might need to add, is spinosad. Spinosad comes in a variety of different trade names. This one actually, fortunately, is just called spinosad, but you might also find it called Captain Jack's Dead Bug Brew or some other things. But spinosad is a naturally occurring bacteria. It was actually discovered in an old rum distillery down in the Caribbean. And it has natural insecticide qualities to it. So it's really good. It's a commonly used thing in organic gardening. Really safe to use. Just hook it up to the hose, spray away. Has a fair amount of residual effect as well. So this should last a while. So that's a really good product for Japanese beetles as well, and is pretty harmless to most of the pollinating insects that might be on a plant. But so those are just a couple of options that you can use for spraying. If you're using something that is systemic, like a drench or things like that, you need to be real careful and make sure that you're not using systemic products on plants that are going to be frequented by pollinating insects such as honeybees, butterflies, etc., because those systemic products oftentimes will work their way into the flower, pollen, etc., and will harm the pollinating insects. So we definitely recommend that you avoid the use of those, or at least check and see what it is that you're using. You know, maybe it's something that was early spring blooming, like a magnolia, which usually aren't necessarily affected by Japanese beetles, but they're done blooming. There's no pollinating insects visiting the magnolia in July, August, when the Japanese beetles are out feeding. So if you wanted to spray a magnolia with something systemic in July, August, totally safe, not going to harm any pollinators. So I just want to kind of be clear about that. Okay, so that's Japanese beetles.